What's up, everybody? This is Taylor Lee for Congress here, and we've got another video for you today. First news that I'll be covering is the Nord Stream 2 pipeline from Russia to Germany is complete, and this was a very controversial project that was half sponsored by the Russian energy giant Gazprom. I don't know if I'm saying that right. Gazprom. Yes, Gazprom ready for natural gas export. And it was also financed by 5 Western energy companies. There's a list, but I'll just put it on the screen. And this was controversial because the pipeline goes through the Baltic Sea, and that bypasses countries like Poland and Belarus and Slovakia. So those nations can't collect gas transport fees, which is something that Ukraine currently benefits from right now. And Putin told Ukraine that he's not going to shut off gas. He's going to keep the gas flowing through Ukraine as well, as long as it's economically viable. So Ukraine, which makes really a lot of money there, doesn't have to worry about their economy being hit. And German officials are saying that Russia depends on these exports more than Germany depends on the imports. And the EU refused to back the deal because it doesn't benefit the plan of the EU to diversify Europe's natural gas resources. But Germany doesn't care because they're phasing out nuclear power, and they need something to fuel their growth and development as they switch over to renewables. And something interesting here too is that natural gas is a renewable. Currently, we don't have the facilities or infrastructure to really replace natural gas at the rate that we're using it, but it's just methane gas. Every time you fart, you're making methane gas. Cows, any sort of waste. When you have sewage processing, you can take methane out of that waste. The sewage processing plants that I'm aware of don't have this infrastructure, but you can do it. So with Russia having a population of 120 million people, and it's the biggest country in the planet, plus it's got thawing permafrost and tons of land to grow the plant resources that you would need to create methane, I think Russia has taken a step here towards a very powerful resource export. Now they're gonna have to be smart about it. They can't just use up their natural gas reserves and okay, we're out. They will have to transition to this renewable gas model if they want to do that. But if they do, then I mean that's going to be a powerhouse on its own. And Russia and Canada are both poised to become superpowers in the future if the current rate of warming in the climate continues. Which is a fascinating prospect. As that land thaws out, more people can move there, and the more people move there, the more babies they can make, and the more babies they can make, the stronger the economy, the more manpower you have for war. And that's why this discussion is relevant for this military news update. Also, it's relevant because if a nation didn't like Russia, with how dependent it is on those exports, this is an underwater pipeline, so the damage to the ecosystem isn't as bad as it might appear to be on, say, the tundra, like with Alaska or coming down from Canada. But even those are pretty small impact on the environment. However, being an underwater pipeline, it's not as easy to target from the air. If you saw the Alaska pipeline from the air and you're a bomber crew and you're trying to attack the US, you could easily just drop bombs all along the whole thing. That's a lot of effort to fix that. Plus, there's the oil spill, the fires. I mean, you're going to cause all kinds of damage. But with this pipeline being underwater, it would take a much more precision kind of attack to damage this pipeline. Now, of course, if you damage it, that's going to be more difficult to fix than a terrestrial pipeline, but that's just, it is what it is. And if this leaks, unlike oil, it's just natural gas, it's just methane. It might oxidize a little bit in the water, creating carbon dioxide, which would create carbonic acid in the water. But if there's a sudden drop in pressure, I imagine you could shut off and have much less total damage than you would if this was an oil line that had broken. Next up was an article that I thought was really interesting. It's not super important, but it does relate to the previous article. The Pentagon is tapping the industry for nuclear-powered propulsion for the satellites that are run by the Pentagon. And I find this incredibly interesting, but also slightly alarming, not because I am a nuclear alarmist like a lot of people, but for the opposite reason. The more you use nuclear power, the less you have. It's not a renewable resource. We were taught a lot in school, at least, when I was growing up. A lot of my textbooks said that nuclear was renewable. It counted as renewable just because you get so much energy out of so little of the metal. With uranium is usually where we get our nuclear power from. But the problem is, at current rates, the economically viable resources of uranium on the planet would only power the entire world for like 120 to 200 years. That's it. And then we're gone. And then you can't ever use it again. Coal, you can make more coal. Oil, you can make more oil. It's timely, it's expensive, it's not viable to do that. But you can't just make more uranium. I'm sure, there's a process. You had nuclear fusion. If you bombard, say lead with enough neutrons and protons, you could turn it into uranium, but you're putting a lot more energy into that kind of a system than you're getting out of it. So there's no point in even considering that in the discussion. But, it's worth pointing out. But I am very much against nuclear power. It's nice on paper. It's like communism. It's really nice on paper, but the more you look at it, the more you start to see the flaws, the more it crumbles. And the reason is because we have to switch to renewables either way. With or without nuclear power, we have to make that change if we want to keep electricity. And if we switch to nuclear and then to renewables, we're doing the same thing just with extra steps. We're only buying ourselves another century and a half. And after all of that, you're creating tons of waste that stays radioactive for thousands of years. And you can't just go into a storage facility. And if there's a leak or if it's attacked, it's just, the consequences could be catastrophic. And then that's not even factoring in active power plants. Look at Chernobyl. Human error, of course, but that was a terrible disaster. Look at Fukushima. That was a natural disaster. A tsunami hit the Fukushima power plant in Japan, and now look at it. You can't go to Fukushima. The elderly in Japan are volunteering to go scrape the dirt and throw it away because they're going to die anyway, so they see it as a service to their state to do that. And I actually applaud that. I really like that. But they shouldn't have to, because we should have never had nuclear power there in the first place, especially on the coast. It's right next to your biggest consumers, especially in Japan. Your whole country is basically coastline. But it doesn't make sense to have that much risk. And then there's the risk of terrorist attacks, and not even a terrorist attack. We like to talk about how other countries might attack us. Say if we went to war with Mexico or China. Neither is particularly likely, one more likely than the other, but still. All it would take is one bomber, unimpeded, dropping a couple bombs on San Onofre or one of the other nuclear power plants, and now you've taken out the power, you've created a morale issue, you have radioactive waste spreading everywhere, killing people, and you're also irradiating the military equipment of the military units that are helping the cleanup, making them, you're taking them off the front line of a potential conflict, and you're making sure that they can't be on the front line for a while. They have to be decontaminated, they have to be taken care of. And at the end of the day, even after decontamination, you may not be able to rehabilitate certain vehicles. Helicopters, if you have certain radar absorbing materials, that can hold on to radiation. You get your nice soft seats, you get enough dust in there, it's going to stay inside the foam. You can't use that again. You have to trash it. And that's just a huge hit to the country militarily. And then there's the fact that nuclear-powered submarines are a huge advantage. If we use all of the uranium in the world in 100 years, we won't be able to have nuclear-powered submarines. What are we going to do then? Go back to diesel? Oh, that's right, we ran out of diesel. So it just makes no sense to use nuclear for anything other than the longevity of American warships. That's the only reason we should be using nuclear, and maybe, perhaps, in satellites, if the satellite is gonna have a long shelf life in its job. That's the only reason. And finally, this week, Taiwan's president commissioned a homemade carrier killer. Taiwan has been having escalating relations with China, and because of this, the island has commissioned 6 total carrier killers. Yeah, so the ship is the first of 6, and it's called the Taijiang, and it was built by Lengte Shipbuilding Company. The ship is supposed to have air defenses, which I would expect out of a carrier killer. In fact, I would expect any modern ship to have that. But it's also going to be able to carry anti-ship missiles. And if Taiwan has 6 of these patrolling its coasts during an active conflict with China, then it's going to be able to defend itself pretty well. And if it sinks all of Beijing's carriers, that's going to be a problem for any sort of invasion, and China will not be able to enforce its will on Taiwan. So this is an interesting and smart decision, in my opinion, from Taiwan's perspective. How that situation develops, I'm really interested to see. I think China will eventually take steps in one way or another to assimilate Taiwan back into China. But I think China's ambitions are much larger and broader. I think the Taiwan issue is more of a legacy issue. It's more of an issue of pride. And I think economically and just by what makes strategic sense, instead of getting bogged down in an expensive war with Taiwan, China might opt to simply isolate it and starve it out while it's continuing to build its other projects like the Belt and Road Initiative. One last note here is that Taiwan's president has said that they're ready to build up any sort of defense they need to, and they are trying to wean themselves from reliance on other nations like the United States to defend it, because things are getting bad enough now that they're a little afraid that they may not be able to rely on their allies like Japan and the US. That being said, I've been your host, Taylor Lee for Congress. If you like the show, please don't forget to dislike and unsubscribe, and leave a hateful comment for the YouTube algorithm. Thanks for watching. I appreciate your time.